if you have an effective training plan that you're just continuously doing that has proper strength training fundamentals, proper power training fundamentals, proper endurance fundamentals, by the time test day rolls around, you shouldn't really have to have changed all that much because you're already doing the things that you should be doing. That's kind of, I think, the big point here is that you shouldn't train specifically for the test. I think if that's where you're at mentally, physically, psychosocially, whatever, you'll probably be in a good place. Am I doing it? Hey guys, welcome back to another week of Mops and Mo's with Drew and Alex. As we occasionally like to do, this week there are no guests. It's just Alex and myself. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Drew.
We are going to kind of riff here a little bit on how to train for the ACFT. So going event by event, how we think it makes sense to train for it, and then more largely or more broadly, how to train for the test as a whole.
I've been thinking about doing this for a little bit, and this is kind of a give the people what they demand kind of thing, because I'm consistently frustrated that whenever I post about or discuss the ACFT itself, that tends to be the most popular content on the page because that's what soldiers are looking for. Spoiler alert, my main recommendation for how to train for the ACFT is to not train for the ACFT. But we will dive into a little bit of why that is and how you can still be smart about your training and help it set you up for success on test day and things like that.
And I'll add here that whereas before we've done episodes like training for strength, training for endurance that are intentionally meant to be X's and O's and building out an actual program, I think this is meant to be more of a discussion around best practices and less a pull out a pin and we're going to go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. There may be some of that, but it's more a discussion around, like I said, best practices for training and what that might look like, both on the short term and long term.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
I almost said over. I almost said short term and long term over. God, dude.
Is this our music break that's happening right now?
I hope so. Whatever. You can include what you want. I mean, go through the ACFT history. Before you start, I would direct people towards the Dave DeGroot episode where he actually went through the history of it. But anything you want to add?
Yeah. Have I slapped together a blog post on like how the ACFT came to be? Is that something I put on there yet? I don't know.
No.
I'm taking a look. It does not look like it. That would be a worthy blog post. And I think I have something drafted already. And to be honest, what I have drafted already is somewhat grumpy because I'm gonna do the short version of the ACFT history here for the audience, and I will reveal a little bit of cynicism as I do. The ACFT development coincided with a couple noteworthy things. One was kind of a senior leader acknowledgement that the fitness level of the force was not sufficient for combat, right? The APFT was developed during an era when a lot of people thought we would not be in ground combat ever again. And it was designed during the era when like America was embracing jogging and all that stuff. Like Cooper Institute was a huge deal. And so it was not designed to test combat readiness at all. It was designed to test like a baseline level of healthiness, whatever. So that was part of it. And another part of it was the rescission of the ground combat rule, which opened combat MOSs to women. And so they were looking for a test that would require the components of fitness that leaders had identified as necessary for combat and something that ideally would be gender neutral. That was like a mandate at the beginning of the process. And it would seem logical that if you were going to raise the fitness standard to meet the demands you've observed, that you would expect people to struggle with the new standard initially. Like you already said, the current fitness of the force is probably not meeting what we need. You should have a plan for how to respond if failure rates are initially higher if you raise the standard, right? Because you should expect people to struggle initially. It doesn't seem like we had that plan. So the politics of it got really frustrating. Lots of people who are in the Army watched this play out with ACFT 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. things kept changing. Was it going to be gender neutral? Was it not? Everybody's freaking out about the leg tuck. Actually, initially everybody was freaking out about the deadlift. They thought everybody's like spines were going to crumble, but very quickly it shifted to the leg tuck as the cause of everyone's fear, not because of injuries, but because of failures. I think we've articulated plenty on here what my opinion about the leg tuck is. I won't rehash that. But and I'll say it the way I say it every time. This might be contentious, I don't know, but instead of setting the standard and challenging people to reach it, we decided to lower the bar until everybody could step over it. My latest frustration, my latest gripe is that now that we have this 540 exemption on the body composition policy, getting 80 for men and women on the 2 mile run all the way up to at least age 40. I think I checked the scales on this one. The 80-point score on the 2 mile run under the ACFT currently would have been failing on the APFT. Just putting in perspective, I know you're a little bit more fatigued after the sprint drag carry and stuff. Got it. But the fact that a 2 mile run time that would have been seen as failure under our previous standard is now good enough that you are considered like above and beyond fit and don't need to undergo tape test. I find that interesting. Is that enough ACFT history? I guess it's worth noting, if you haven't read the baseline soldier physical readiness requirement study and the physical demand study that predated it, those are worth checking out. If you're a huge nerd, we talked to Dave DeGroot to go back and listen to that episode where he talks about a lot of it. And it digs into like the components of fitness and selecting assessments for those components. And we're gonna go through some like doctrine and regulation kind of stuff here for a second to lay the groundwork. But after that, we'll come back and talk about the importance of understanding what component of fitness each event is testing, because really you should be training for those components of fitness rather than the events themselves.
I'm curious about, I mean, this might get further into the history of things, but like I got some stuff pulled up, and I mean, you go back to 1906 was when the first Army-wide physical training requirement was established. So that was General Order number 44, required weekly infantry 12-mile rucks and 18-mile movements for horse-mounted artillery and cavalry. It also established a 3-day 90-mile riding test for the cavalry and horse-mounted artillery and a 45-mile ruck march test for the infantry. And I wonder if in 1906, when that came out, people were up in arms about, oh, we have this test now, we have to train for it. And then similarly, like 1941, you got Field Manual 2120, which was the first field manual dedicated to physical training. I Googled it and pulled it up, and the most, I guess, quote unquote, recent version is 1992. So you might have to do some digging to find 1941, but they had a 4-event physical test, which was 100-yard sprint, 14 seconds, not too bad. A running high jump of 3 feet 9 inches, which seems pretty low. A running broad jump of 12 feet, which seems pretty impressive, and 20 push-ups. And again, I kind of wonder if the 1906 crew who was doing 45-mile rucks, 1941 comes out and they're like, wait a second, we're going to do push-ups? What the heck?
As I understand it, I don't know this. I'd have to go back. I'd probably have to read Dr. East's book, actually. But from what I have heard, and this, like, there are still people running around working for the DoD who were there when the APFT was first implemented, so they remember that whole drama.
We're there in 1906. I was like, yeah.
No. But even with like the implementation of the APFT, which was much after all of that stuff, that was the first real effort to like actually standardize it across the force. Because even though orders were published and there were tests and everything, implementation was not universal across the force, and a lot of places resisted.
You talking about the 40s?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's not totally consistent across the entire Army. And even when it came to APFT implementation time, like the Pentagon had to send out teams to a few different installations that were just like essentially refusing to do the new test. Like they were like, if we just ignore it, it'll go away, surely. And it took like a year or two to get everybody in line on it.
I mean, I don't know. I don't want to turn it into a rant on military testing philosophy. I mean, you can't not have a test. And I think the ACFT, I've kind of warmed up to it. I think it's actually a pretty good collection of events. Certainly it's better than what it has been, because like you mentioned, it does force you to address strength and endurance and some component of what we would probably call work capacity for the sprint track carry. So like it's if you can muddle through the political red tape around it, I think the events themselves are decent.
I think it's good too. I think something a few senior leaders have said publicly that I hope people are hearing is that the 40-year stretch where we did the APFT relatively unchanged, I don't think they expect that to happen again, right? They want there to be change. They want there to be revisions based on lessons learned. They want to make adjustments or whatever. And I hope people can understand that the like changes to that, like recurring changes, are a good thing. Like people are going to get mad because people hate change, but it's impossible to come up with a perfect test. So a little bit of like dynamicness in what we test for and like being ready for changes, I think is absolutely a good thing. Hopefully it's not as political as it was trying to implement the ACFT and all this drama and back and forth. But I hope that people get over that resistance to change and realize that you should be ready for different things in the fitness world. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy.
Well, here's a hot take. What if you can't, I mean, for all the senators and congressmen that I know we have listening to this podcast, you're not allowed to have an opinion on the ACFT unless you can get a 540 minimum with an 80 on each event. Then I think you should be able, okay, once you hit that threshold, then you can commentate on like
I don't think there should be a leg time.
anyway, I will grant you your pedestal here, and I will ask you to elaborate on the point you made in the intro, which was that you should not actually train for the test.
Yeah, so I'm gonna reference things like the Army itself says, right? I don't want people to miss this. And like everybody loves putting doctrinal references in PowerPoint slides. So if you have to go give a class to soldiers about this, here you go. I'm feeding some to you. But I guess first I'll go with a quote from FM 7-22 that says, "There is no single unified assessment that works for every soldier."
Let me pause you. FM 722, for those that are not.
Holistic Health and Fitness, the Army's new
Yep.
doctrine for fitness, October 2020.
And FM is a field manual.
You mentioned 21-20 before. It is that turned into 7-22 with physical readiness training, what everybody knows as PRT, and it evolved once again into Holistic Health and Fitness. It is the Army's fitness manual. But I think it's cool that there's an acknowledgement that although the ACFT attempts to be a one-size-fits-all solution to the testing of fitness, that just doesn't exist. That's a holy grail that people are searching for. There is no one perfect solution. I kind of liked the language that was in the old version better, or maybe it was in 21-20. I don't even remember which, but it like directly encouraged commanders to come up with their own unit-specific assessment. Now, that's not something you're going to chapter people out if they fail, but it is a way to like inform your force on like the fitness expectations that are more specific to your mission and what you as a commander expect. And I hope commanders continue to do that. Or I say continue, most units don't have it, but I hope commanders think about having some kind of mission-driven assessment specific to their unit to like broadcast to their soldiers, hey, ACFT is like everybody's pulse check on fitness. It's the Army standard. You should probably care about it and perform on it, but this is what is specific to our unit's mission. I don't know. Maybe that's crazy. Whatever. Next, I think this is like the same paragraph of 7-22, but soldiers must train into physical readiness. They cannot test into physical readiness. ACFT just validates fitness. It is not the program. And you should not, actually, we're going to switch. Brief pause to explain the difference between doctrine and policy and regulation, right? I routinely hear this from soldiers, from NCOs, even from officers, like treating doctrine as though it is regulation. It is not. It doesn't have the same enforceability. Doctrine is a way to do things. Commanders are authorized to diverge from doctrine. They're just expected to know it before they diverge and have a reason why. So it's nice to know what the policy says. So if you're somebody who's like into Army fitness, I would absolutely make sure you've read the section of Army Regulation 350-1 that goes over physical readiness training and testing. And don't get mixed up when you go in there, because there's a section on testing for like courses specifically. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the one that applies to like all units all the time. But I'm only going to quote one line of it. physical readiness testing will not form the foundation of unit or individual physical training programs. And there's some hypocrisy in having that sentence in our regulation, given that our doctrine, I don't know if it's still there. I'd have to go back and check. But throughout the APFT era, we had the push-up sit-up drill in our doctrine, which is like very obviously a drill designed around the test. It's just ironic and annoying and dumb. Like a push-up sit-up drill doesn't make any sense. But if you're like showing up to PT and just doing like different combinations of the ACFT movements, you are actually in violation of policy, not just doctrine.
You think somebody's walking around with AR 350-1 being like,
You can't make us do that because here it says.
I should.
I guarantee nobody's doing that.
No, of course not. And that's like a not terribly enforceable line anyway. But okay, what else? Going to cite a little science here that's useful to know. I don't think this will come as a surprise to anybody who's been around the Army much, but physical training related injuries are our most common type of injuries in the Army. So much so, in fact, that if we look only at the medical evacuation data from combat, so from Iraq and Afghanistan, just those soldiers who were deployed to combat, it is still the most common cause of medical evacuations.
Shout out to all the guys doing 1,000-pound club on deployments.
Hey, you got to pass the time somehow. So first off, non-battle injuries from the data I looked at, and this is all I'm going to cite. I know I don't go to just one source for something this complicated, but I'm referencing Patel and colleagues 2017. Let me get the full title here. Non-battle injuries among U.S. Army soldiers deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq, 2001 to 2013. First off, they point out that non-battle injuries account for, or like non-combat related medical evacuations are 67% of all medical evacuations. So people are more frequently medevaced for things that have nothing to do with combat than they are for things with combat. And the single, if you like narrow it down to like single causes, physical training related injuries are the single greatest cause of medical evacuations from both Iraq and Afghanistan. So being smart about the way we train, like the point of PT is to like build you up and make you ready and make you strong and make you fast and resistant to injury. And instead we're doing it in such a way that it is our leading cause of injury, even in combat, not just as we prepare for combat. That's terrifying.
It's so not surprising.
It's not, but like, man, we got to do better. So training smarter is crucial to mitigating training related injuries. And the most common type of training injury is overuse injuries, mostly lower body, mostly attributable to running. And I'll put an asterisk. This is not from the authors. This is from me, but I would attribute it to like poorly planned running progression, making somebody who's not ready do more running than they're prepared for. And you can certainly get overuse injuries from other things too. I think if you can do 70 push-ups but 0 leg tucks, you probably have an upper body imbalance, and I would worry about shoulder overuse injuries. Where am I going? This is stuff that gets me frustrated.
You're triggered. You're triggered right now.
Yeah, I'm for sure triggered. I guess before, because we're on the brink of diving into the actual body of this, of how to train for the ACFT, but I'll acknowledge that despite all the things I just said, inevitably, large portions of the force are going to train for the test. And people respond to incentives, right? If the test drives promotions, if the test drives retention, they're going to train for it. And that's going to apply to any service, any organization. If you have a test, people are going to train for that test. But I think it's a step in the right direction in that sense, that training for the ACFT is obviously better for overall health, wellness, fitness than training for the APFT was. So even if nobody listens to what we say here, I think we've set up incentives that will push people towards better training.
Do you think that people are training to do well on the test because they want to do well on the test, or because they're afraid of the consequences if they don't do well on the test?
Oh, I don't know.
Because I ask that because I overhear more conversations of people saying effectively, oh shit, I have an ACFT in 3 weeks, help me, versus oh, I have an ACFT in 6 months. I really want to crush it.
That's probably true.
And that's just like my one corner of the army, but still.
Yeah, that's probably, and I think that's just the reality of like people and procrastination and things like that. Anecdotally, this is from talking to like reserve and guard people, especially. I think like the minimum passing scores on the ACFT are probably easier than the minimum passing scores on the APFT, at least in terms of like it requires less direct preparation. So I would hope that there's not that much fear about not passing, but still like getting a low score has consequences on your ability to promote. So that's still a negative consequence, even if you pass, just not performing super well. Everybody stresses about tests regardless, though.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about training. My 2 cents on this is as sort of an intro to things is from a strength and conditioning coach standpoint, and specifically like a tactical strength and conditioning coach standpoint, the ACFT from an Army perspective, and if you're Navy, Air Force, whatever, just insert your PT test. That's effectively your sport or your game or your event, whatever you want to call it. But from that, I think when you think about it that way, it adds to the discussion we've already been having, which is you shouldn't train for the test by doing the test. It would be the equivalent of like if you're in the NFL, you're not playing a game every day to get ready for the game on Sunday. You're kind of breaking down the components of it, optimizing the different pieces, and then putting it all together on Sunday so that you can do well. And I think the ACFT is kind of the exact same thing. And so for a lot of the things that we talk about over the next little bit with training, it's like you can break down the test to the different events, but I think more broadly speaking, step one for me is looking at the calendar and figuring out when is my test. If it's 6 months from now, that's a different conversation than if it's 1 month from now. And if it's 6 months from now, or you're looking even further down the road, a year from now, or whatever, my thought would be that we would want to be focusing more on general physical preparedness, general strength, general aerobic conditioning, so that when you get closer to the test, and we'll probably dive into this later on, but 3 months out, 4 months out, that's when you can start to get more specific in terms of ordering the different events within your training session, stacking things, going from a deadlift to a power throw, going from a sprint track carry to a plank to a run, piecing it all together so that by the time the test day rolls around, you're just putting together stuff that you've already been crushing for the last couple of months. So that's kind of, I think there's probably a number of different rabbit holes we can go down there, but that's kind of my initial thought.
I'm not going to disagree necessarily as much as add a layer. I get what you're saying in terms of it is your sport, in terms of like look at it as the game and break down how you prepare for the game. I would contend that your mission or combat is probably the game, so to speak, in terms of what you should be preparing for in the big picture. But since we can acknowledge the reality of the test is important to people's careers and they want to prepare for it, the mindset of looking at that as the physical demand and then breaking it down, I think that absolutely still applies. And this will probably be the last time this episode, but I will do one final quote from Doctrine.
It won't be the last time, I'm sure.
We'll see. But this one, I'm going to like, hey, like all NCOs out there, or like even strength coaches that are working directly with soldiers, honestly, if you wanted to set up like a class to teach people about how to train a little bit better, this is the quote I would probably open with, which is that, and this is paragraph 6-2 from FM 7-22. Fitness is often broken down into and measured by commonly accepted parts labeled components. These components have evolved with advances in exercise science and technology. I'm going to stop the quote here and just turn into regular English. But the idea is each event of the ACFT exists to be a sampling of a component of fitness that has been determined to be relevant to combat, right? And this might make more sense with examples. The deadlift is an assessment of lower body strength. It is not only lower body strength. There's other things that matter, right? There's grip and whatever and balance and all that. But it primarily exists in the context of the test to evaluate lower body strength. It is also not the only way to evaluate lower body strength. A squat would also be lower body strength. A million exercises could assess lower body strength. It is just a sampling of it. It is a tiny piece of the pie. If you train for lower body strength in general, you will perform pretty well on the deadlift. If you train for only the deadlift and nothing else, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that when you arrive in combat, there will not be a lot of hex bars on the battlefield. The actual demands on your lower body strength will be different. So if the only lower body strengthening stuff you ever do are 3-rep max hex bar deadlifts, you might not be like robust and adaptable to the lower body strength demands of combat. And that applies to every event, right? Standing power throw, assessment of power, push-ups, upper body muscular endurance, 2-mile run, aerobic capacity, plank, core stability, sprint drag carry. We're going to call it anaerobic capacity. I believe that's the way it's referred to in doctrine. I know the term anaerobic triggers Drew. I apologize.
I appreciated the air quotes.
Yeah, sorry. But start thinking in components of fitness. And we will talk about these as we go through the events because we're about to go event by event through the test and talk about them. But train for the component of fitness and sprinkle in the event, especially as you get closer to test day. Don't train just the event, or else you're going to have huge gaps in your fitness when it comes time for real life.
Let's do the deadlift.
Cool. Event number 1.
Deadlift, 3-rep max deadlift. So I'm some of this stuff I'm pulling directly from the Army's ACFT website, which I haven't spent enough time on to know if I agree or disagree. So we'll kind of figure that out in real time. But your 3-rep deadlift is assessing your maximum strength. Well, maximum strength for 3 reps. And you could make the case for balance and flexibility. Like if you truly can't get into that position, okay, fine, flexibility might be a thing. But ultimately, when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking of maximum strength. And then for me, again, from a strength and conditioning standpoint, training for the thing, you mentioned some of this. You wouldn't want to just be doing deadlifts. I think that's probably the biggest mistake that I see people making right off the bat. And there's 2 reasons for that. Number 1, I think, is on the individual, just a misunderstanding of some of the stuff you just mentioned, which is fitness components versus movements. You know, like I said, the further out you are from your test, you would probably do well to include just a broad base of strength in your training. And I would refer folks to the episode that we did on training for strength, because we kind of talked through how you would practically do some of those things. I think the second issue that we see happen is that from an equipment standpoint, you do see folks being limited to just having hex bars in some cases. I wouldn't say that that is a blanket excuse. I mean, surely you could find a gym that will allow you to use a straight bar or has a straight bar, but I would challenge folks to get away from this idea of thinking, well, hey, my organization only has an ACFT kit. Ipso facto, I only have a hex bar. Therefore, I'm only going to do hex bar deadlifts. I think closer to the test, obviously, you would want to switch gears and get a little bit more specific. But from a general strength training perspective, I would be focusing more on just training to become stronger in the deadlift, certainly, but training to become stronger as well in the squat, even in things like the bench press or the overhead press. Like all of that is going to drive comfort around the barbell, around strength. It's going to drive just neuromuscular adaptations around strength. I think all of that is important when it comes time to bend over and grab the hex bar and rip it for 3 reps.
I'm also going to come at this from almost the opposite direction too. You talked about people only training hex bar because the test is hex bar, especially when you start talking about reserve and guard people. They're like, I don't have any hex bars at my gym, so I can't train for the test. Why is the Army not providing me a hex bar? You don't need to train the hex bar deadlift to develop lower body strength, and having lower body strength will serve you well on that event, even if you never get to practice on a hex bar. With like a tiny asterisk there that at least having a little bit of exposure to a hex bar is probably going to be important. There's the annoying balance element that comes in of making sure you get your hand placement right so it doesn't tip real bad. That's not a thing on a barbell. So like having some exposure to that is nice, but I'll reference something I bring up a lot, right? The very first moment that the ACFT was announced, like a few days or a few weeks later, we started hearing about 600s happening, right? People are getting 600s. Not a lot of people, but some people. Those people didn't get 600s because the Army secretly told them about the ACFT a few months prior and they did ultra specific training for the test. Most of those people probably hadn't really done much deadlifting on a hex bar. They probably trained only on a barbell because that's like what most gyms have. They were just fit. Like they trained for strength and they were pretty decent at endurance stuff. And they're probably quite athletic because 600 is hard to get. But you don't have to do the exact test event to be good at the test events. Like Drew talked about using barbell, like throw in some kettlebell stuff, throw in some dumbbell stuff, do all sorts of things, move in different planes, just get strong in general. And that'll serve you really well. And it'll be good for, balancing out things and avoiding injuries and not having your training be super repetitive, yada, yada, yada.
Hold on, let me add something here because I've seen this happen too. And I will agree with what you are saying about kettlebells, but I will add you cannot kettlebell swing yourself to a stronger 3-rep max deadlift. At some point, you will have to expose your body to maximal loading in a 3-rep range.
This is true. Despite what Pavel Satsulin and the Strong First Pros will tell you.
Yes, you can.
However, a kettlebell swing is not the only kettlebell exercise that exists, for what it's worth.
Sure. Well, I would argue that nor can you kettlebell deadlift your way to a 3-rep max deadlift unless you have a really heavy kettlebell. And the
Rogue will sell you some obnoxiously heavy kettlebells if you got the cash.
That is true. But the point I'm getting to here is that there's a conversation to be had around rep ranges and specificity. And I think this is something that we will see more than once in this conversation, but specific in this case to the deadlift. You got to think about this from like a sports specificity and an adaptation standpoint. So the test is 3 reps, which is coming up, going down, coming up, going down, coming up, going down. There's a time component to that. There's a tension component to that. The only way you're going to optimize that is by hanging around in that 1 to 3, maybe 4 or 5-ish rep range for training. I say that because if you sit there and favor, we talked about kettlebell swings, which is generally going to be higher volume, lighter weight, or even sets of 10, 12, 15, 20, the higher up you go in rep range, the lighter the weight is going to have to be. That's just the way that the world works. And the lighter the weight is, and the further away from the 3-rep the rep range is, the less specific from an adaptation standpoint it's going to be. So while, yes, you may be doing the movement, doing it for a lot of reps at a lighter weight because you are either against or afraid of exposing yourself to heavy weight is going to take you further away from what optimal looks like. Will it make you better? Yeah. I mean, if you have a low training age and you've not done many of these before, certainly you'll get a little bit stronger from doing that, but you won't get strong in the same way that you will if you hang around the 3-rep range with the deadlift. Now, having said all of that, I will add to it, again, we've mentioned this a couple of times, from a training planning standpoint, the further away you are from the test, the more you can experiment with different rep ranges and do different rep ranges. So for example, you'll hear this a lot, people talking about like, oh, I'm going to do a hypertrophy phase and then I'm going to do a strength phase. And that's fine. Like you can do sets of 5 for a couple of weeks, and then you can do sets of 3 as you get closer to the test, or you can go the other way. You can do heavy singles and really drive up your kind of quote unquote 1 rep max. And then you can back off to a 3 as you get closer to the test. So there's different ways to do it. But I think the point there that I'm trying to make is, again, from a specificity standpoint, specific to the deadlift for the ACFT, you should probably get some touches on a 3-rep setup at a weight that is heavy enough to challenge you to grow and adapt.
I buy it.
Anything else on the deadlift?
I want to cover one concept that I think is like helpful, or maybe not even helpful, maybe just interesting, but I think it's neat and it helps me think about lower body training kind of stuff. Shout out to Stronger by Science, other than a slight grumble of Greg Knuckles declining to come on our podcast, but we'll get there. We're just not famous enough for him yet. He's too busy. But they put out really, really good content. I think both Drew and I have looked at tons of their stuff. They do monthly research reviews. They have great content, tons of really smart stuff, a couple PhDs digging into strength conditioning literature. They do tend to focus very much on like powerlifting and bodybuilding because they are a powerlifter and a bodybuilder, but they stray outside that plenty. But I'm going to specifically shout out, they've talked about it on their podcast, but they have an article on their blog. It's titled Trap Bar Deadlifts. Actually, I think it might actually be titled Trap Bar Deadlifts Are Underrated or something like that. We'll drop the link in the show notes to this episode, but it introduces the concept of the squat hinge continuum. So lower body training, a squat is going to be more kind of knee dominant, lots of knee flexion happening, whereas a perfect hinge would be something like a good morning where your knees don't bend at all. And your lower body movements are going to fall somewhere on that continuum. A barbell deadlift is not obviously a perfect hinge. There is some knee bending happening. A trap bar deadlift is even less hingy than a barbell deadlift. And the taller you are, the squattier it's going to be. So it's closer to the middle of that spectrum. And I think that's kind of nice because that means that it's going to favor well-rounded training across the squat hinge continuum. So it encourages the kind of generalized training we would want to see for overall performance. So I don't know if that's useful to people or not. I think it's really cool. Check out Stronger by Science's article if you want to learn more.
I think it's useful because it makes the case, like you just mentioned, for a trap bar deadlift specifically, squatting is actually quite beneficial. I mean, you can make the case. You can make the case that squatting is good for a regular deadlift, and I think it is. But the trap bar, and you'll feel this the first time you do it. Like it is a slightly different position. You are a little bit more upright in your torso. It is a little bit more quad dominant. So doing squats and having that base of strength, which again goes back to what we said at the beginning. Just to put like a practical bow on the deadlift component of this podcast, lift heavy, hang out in the further away you are from your test, hang out in like a 5-rep range space, lift at a rate of procedure exertion of like an 8 out of 10 pretty regularly. And then as you get closer to your test, start going down in reps, which if you keep RPE at an 8 would intrinsically mean that the weight is getting heavier. And then if you are doing a straight bar, that's totally fine. But again, as you get closer to the test, maybe experiment with the hex bar, see how it feels, play around with grip, play around with foot placement. And then when the test rolls around, shouldn't be an issue. We'll bring this up later, I think, talking about the buildup of fatigue as you get into these events, especially the later events. The nice thing about the deadlift being first is that you don't necessarily have to worry about that. So you can just come into this as you would any deadlift in any regular training session and just kind of go for it.
Sweet.
Standing power throw.
Let's do it.
So I'm gonna take this directly from, again, the ACFT website. For those that are unfamiliar with the standing power throw, you're effectively, your back is to the field and that you're holding a 10-pound ball and chucking it over your head as far as you can for distance.
The kids call it yeeting.
We have stickers for that, which maybe one day will be for sale on the website if we can figure out how to make it happen.
Sorry, one day I'll get my shit together.
But so the standing power throw, this is looking mostly at explosive power. I mean, it's not the ball that you're throwing is not heavy enough to challenge maximal strength. You could make the case for coordination being part of this too. And, again, it's one of those where practice makes perfect. I think the Army says that flexibility is part of this. I don't know. Maybe you'd have to be pretty inflexible for flexibility to be part of this, I would think. Am I missing something?
I mean, I guess like overhead position, there might be like a little bit of limitation. I don't know.
But if you're yeeting that thing, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
So unlike the deadlift, for me, there's some technique obviously associated with a hex bar deadlift, but for me, the standing power throw is predominantly skill and technique related. Like I have seen guys tweak something about their technique and gain massive distance just because of the angle of the release or the, preloading by going down first and then going up and throwing. But I think from a training standpoint, we talked with the deadlift about how you would do well to kind of experiment or play with movements different from the deadlift, like squats, etc. I think with the standing power throw, one, because it is light enough to where you're not necessarily going to risk injury, but two, because it does have a pretty robust skill component. I think this is one where you should probably spend more time doing the actual thing and just practicing the actual thing, unless you disagree with me.
I don't completely disagree with you, but I don't hold that opinion as strongly as I used to. So I'll talk about a couple reasons why. One, first off, the Army did not invent the standing power throw. We're the only people that call it the standing power throw, but there's lots of literature on what they tend to refer to as the backward overhead medicine ball throw, aka the bomb throw.
The bomb throw? Oh,
The bomb
ooh,
throw. And it
nice.
is pretty well validated. And there is some evidence to suggest that height is not quite as important as some of us superficially suggest it is, although I tend to watch tall people max this event, no
I was gonna say,
problem.
if you're taller, you have longer arms. You're gonna have better
Yeah, I'm gonna have
leverage.
to dig into that one a little bit.
Anyway,
But I have seen plenty good results from doing lots of cleans and then trying to transition over. I've seen good results with like broad jump stuff. I think the cool thing about like so power training, you kind of have to do it fairly frequently to like maintain what you have and get better. The nice thing about that is you don't have to do a lot of it, so you can mix it in at the beginning of lots of workouts. But I do like a fair amount of standing broad jumps, and those seem to carry over pretty well. Plate jumps are a kind of goofy exercise. I actually during COVID I followed garage gym athletes programming because I was stuck training in my garage, and they have plate jumps in their program a lot. So that's where I kind of got started doing those, and that's
what is
literally
a
or knee
plate jump?
jumps. I've heard it referred to as knee jumps. I've heard it referred to as plate jumps. You kneel
Oh,
down
yeah. Mhm.
and jump to your feet, and as you get good at it, you put like a plate or two in front of you and like land on the plate a few inches above the ground. It
Mhm.
sounds awkward. It
It is
requires a little bit of
awkward.
athleticism, but it does work pretty well, and it forces you to use your hips, right? Because I've seen people think that the standing power throw is an upper body focused thing. It is not. Power comes from your hips. People will be familiar with the term triple extension and things like that. Doing a knee jump or a plate jump will force you because you have to generate all of it from your hips. So I think that dials in a little bit of that skill stuff. But admittedly, coming back to what you said, specificity is a thing, skill is a thing in this event, getting your release angle right, all that kind of stuff. So as you get close to the test, you're gonna want to get your hands on a ball occasionally. And I will shout out a Mops and Mo's post. This is an old one. I'll probably repost it around the time this episode goes live. I have a few posts that I'll probably be dropping around this episode because I've talked about how to train for the ACFT plenty. But shout out Sergeant Montgomery from the physical fitness school. Don't know where you are now. I should send you a text and find out. But he put together a protocol for the standing power throw. Pretty straightforward. It involves a lot of rest, but it really involves exposing yourself to higher weights than 10 pounds and then coming back to 10 pounds. And we saw some people make dramatic improvements in their standing power throw with just some intelligently designed training. So I will share Sergeant Montgomery's protocol as well.
See, that's okay. I'm glad you mentioned that because I actually wrote that down, different weights, question mark, because I'm not going to take a stance on this. But what I will say is that you find in the research a lot of work that has been done that will actually counter the idea that you should go heavier in weight. Now, most of that is for baseball pitchers, quarterbacks, baseball like hitting and using, because you'll see it in
Yeah,
baseball.
putting weights on the bat
Yeah,
and
putting
stuff.
weights
Yeah.
on the bat. The risk that you run is that it alters the mechanics and alters the actual movement. And I think that a lot of that is through the lens of like a Tom Brady, where you don't want to mess with his mechanics, less so a standing power throw type thing where it's a little bit more generic. So again, like I don't, because you also find research that will, like you just mentioned, or even just anecdotal stuff that will say, hey, this helps. I think where I would probably say that it could be beneficial is if you are able to within the test day or near the test day, or even when you're just kind of training on your own, sure, it might help to throw a 12 or a 15 pound so that the 10-pound does feel light. But if you make that sort of the cornerstone of your training for this event, you do run the risk of tweaking the actual mechanics in a negative way. Again, just throwing that out there because there is literature that has been shown that it is actually counterproductive. But I'll walk back what I said earlier about only doing the event to train for the event, because I agree with you about power cleans being stronger. I think this is one of those events where if you take two athletes, everything about them is the same. They've had the same amount of exposure to the standing power throw, but one of them is stronger than the other one. The stronger person is going to do better on this event. Similarly, the other one, if they're more powerful, they have a higher power clean, whatever, they will do better on this event. So kind of like what we talked about with the deadlift, more broadly, what we talked about in the training for strength episode a couple weeks ago, having a broader base of strength and then introducing some gym based power stuff like power cleans, like box jumps, that type of stuff, will have a direct carryover to doing well in this event. And then you layer on top of that the skill component, being comfortable with the preload, being comfortable with throwing all this weight backwards and then landing effectively, blah 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 blah. The angle that you throw at, all of that stuff comes into play from a sport specificity standpoint.
I will throw in two probably final notes before we move on from the standing power throw. And I may get Dave DeGroot in my DMs after this, correcting me if I'm wrong.
Hey, Dave.
There could be some apocryphal stuff here. But one, it is my understanding, and I haven't seen this in writing anywhere, I've only heard it, that the standing power throw was actually used as a replacement for the event they would have preferred from a purely validity standpoint, which, as I understand it, was the standing broad jump. And the throw was put in to mitigate the injury risk of occasionally unathletic people flying through the air don't land so well. And I've seen more people get hurt doing standing broad jumps than I've seen do overhead medicine ball throws. So that kind of makes sense to me. But if you go and do those two movements, if you're struggling with the technique of your power throw, try doing some broad jumps and you realize it's kind of the same movement at a different angle, right? Same thing applies to like a vertical jump. Same thing to a decent degree applies to a power clean. You're like
sprinting.
It's obviously different. Yeah, but there's some consistency between those movements that you might get some value from in practicing it and just learning to be powerful. And then people get real worked up about the fact that they've never chucked something backwards overhead in combat. So this must be a bad assessment. This comes back to the components of fitness thing, right? This is not an assessment of your ability to chuck something over your head backwards. It is an assessment of your explosive power. And it is, in fact, a pretty valid assessment of that. So like the actual powerful things you do in combat might be different. You might be like hand-to-hand combat and have to throw somebody on the ground or push somebody away or jump over something or whatever it is. There's lots of explosive things you might need to do in combat. Even though you're not throwing something backwards, it's still the same component of fitness at its foundation. But that's why you should train power broadly, not just train for the standing power throw.
So then we'll do another practical bow on this one. Like you just mentioned, further away from the test, I would inject, already we talked about this with the deadlifts, but I would inject plenty of strength training, plenty of power type training, broad jumps, box jumps, power cleans. If the power clean freaks you out, you can do, clean pulls, high pulls, just something.
Dumbbell cleans also good.
Dumbbell cleans. You talked about triple extension, just hip extension type movements that force you to move quickly. And then as you get closer, start to introduce the ball. If you wanted to go heavier, you can. Even if you wanted to go lighter. I think one last point that I'll make on it, though, since we're talking about practical, is that you don't want to go at this one with a fatigue mindset of doing a ton of reps quickly. I don't see a lot of people doing that necessarily.
I do.
Just grabbing, just chucking.
You've triggered me, and I can't believe I forgot to bring this up earlier in it. But like traditional Army physical training involves super high reps and super low rests of things.
Don't do high rep power throws.
Yeah, that'll work for a lot of things.
People do high rep power throws.
I have seen people come into the gym and just throw back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until they're a sweaty, exhausted mess. And that is like for sure not the way to go, right?
Don't do that.
But this brings up something important is there's lots of flexibility in how you train, and like training high rep will work for a lot of components of fitness decently to establish a base. The one where it's really going to undermine you is explosive speed and power kind of stuff. You have to be rested enough, and the sets have to be small enough that you can put like maximal intent into each rep, like being explosive every time. So like this is one of the ones where pre-fatiguing yourself is absolutely going to work against you, and or doing super high sets where you're not able to put full effort into it and you're just slogging through the movement is really, really not going to help.
I didn't think there were people out there doing high rep med ball toss, but
I've
hopefully,
seen it.
hopefully, if you're listening and you're one of those people, you don't do that anymore.
And that applies to all the things we mentioned as alternative exercises. So your broad jumps, your knee
Yes, that's
jumps,
true.
your
That's true.
cleans, whatever. You have to train. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a super high weight, but it has to be fast.
Fast with
So you're
intent.
probably doing small sets. Yeah,
Mhm.
and like longer rests than your first sergeant probably wants during
Shout out
PT.
first sergeants. All right, next event, hand release push up, max reps in 2 minutes. So again, I'm on the Army's website looking at muscle endurance, and their favorite buzzword apparently flexibility. Okay, fine. You stick your arm out and then you bring it back in and you do a push up. I think the big kicker here is that it's a timed 2 minute thing, and you're filling that with as many reps as you can. What's a perfect score on this one?
I mean, we have age and gender categories
Yeah,
now,
that's
so it's
okay.
going to vary.
Fine. Give me a ballpark.
I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 for young gentlemen.
So anytime, and this is kind of, to me, this is a little bit of a legacy event, because a timed calisthenic thing is synonymous with military PT tests. Like it's one of those things that everybody is aware of, everybody trains for it, everybody's seen it, everybody's done it. There's ways to do it well and there's ways to do it poorly. I actually think a good kind of trick for this, just generally speaking, like for the rest of your life, is a kind of grease the groove approach, which I may have stolen from Stu Smith. I don't know if I did or not, but Stu Smith, for those that are unaware, he's a former Navy SEAL who kind of was one of the OGs in the tactical training space. But the grease the groove idea is essentially accumulating reps across the day or across, your training session or whatever time frame you want to consider, but just accumulating quality reps in chunks that are effective but not fatiguing. So I'll give you an example. When I lived in the UK, put a pull-up bar over my door. Every time I walked under it, I would do
That's exactly where I learned about grease the groove, was trying to get really good at pull-ups.
Pull-ups. Yeah, I think a lot of people go that way. But every time I walked under the door, I think it was like 5 to 10 reps. So nothing that's going to smoke me. But if you do that, 4, 5, 6 times a day, that's like 30 plus pull-ups that you would not have otherwise done. Alternatively, if you try to just do a single set of 30 reps, you wouldn't be able to do it. So I think further away from the test, just getting into this idea of higher volume calisthenics, that's a great starting point. Just doing chunks of sets throughout the day or throughout your training session sub maximally.
I introduced the idea of grease the groove to my platoon when I was a platoon leader, and it caught on to like a mildly obnoxious degree, but we had a pull-up bar in the door because it's me. Obviously, there's a pull-up bar in the door of the platoon office. But like also for push-ups and stuff, like soldiers would walk by and just like yell grease the groove and do a few pull-ups or do a few push-ups in the hallway or something. It worked pretty well.
I started finding excuses not to go into my bedroom, because eventually I got up to where I think I was doing like 12 every time I walked under it. And there were days where I'd grab something, walk out, forget something, go back in, and you'd end up doing like 36 in the span of, 5 minutes, which is excessive.
Yeah.
But
my buddy, when he was in EXO, implemented a policy of you have to do 5 pull-ups to enter the office, and it deters people from annoying you frivolously when you're trying to get work done.
you know what? I'm going to steal that. Okay. Anyway, hand release push-ups, muscle endurance. So sure, you'll hear people talk about lactic acid. It's not a thing, but just the fatigue that you start to feel when you do high rep stuff, the muscular failure you start to feel when you do high rep stuff, that is something that you can train for and push to the right. So you can get in more reps before you start to experience that. The way I would set this up from again, strength and conditioning standpoint is if you conduct kind of a baseline, or you have a number in your head of how many you can do. Say it's 50. I just made that up. Do sets of 20, 30, like a set that is manageable, but kind of pushes you close to where you start to feel the burn, you start to feel the breakdown, you start to feel the technique kind of getting a little bit wonky, and then rest. I say that because the alternative, which I see all the time, is just multiple sets of max rep push-ups, thinking that you're going to break through the wall somehow because you keep slamming your face into it. And that is not necessarily something that I would advocate for all the time.
I'll buy that. One I'm going to do, because people have asked me this before. Actually, first, I'm going to talk about the biggest frustration I see with like poor enforcement of testing standards. Because most of the events on the ACFT, there's not a lot of flex in like the standard. Hand release push-ups, however, the standard is first, this is index finger inside the outer edge of the shoulder. Weird anecdote, if you're missing an index finger legally, this is like an actual law. If you are missing an index finger, your next finger that exists becomes legally your index finger for fingerprinting purposes. Why do I know that? I've run into soldiers who are missing an index finger. Not that that helps anyone.
Does that work for the push-up too?
So yeah, technically they have to be narrower because they have to get whatever finger is the first one.
What if you're down to just your pinky? I mean, your elbows
right? You're having a hard time.
I'm sitting here on Zoom trying to figure this out, and I'm chicken winging the hell out of my arm.
Not that that helps. Anyway, I mean, I don't know how many listeners we have that are missing index fingers. But back to the point, the real thing where I see people mess it up is your body has to come off the ground as a single unit. And I will point you, I know we like made fun of Strong First earlier about pretending that kettlebell swings will get you to the promised land of all strength outcomes. That's a little bit of an exaggeration.
Shout out Pavel.
Yeah, I love Pavel. I love all that stuff. It's great. Just it's not magic. But they have some YouTube videos talking about the hard style plank. And I have a video from like the very old days of Mops and Mo's demonstrating how a hard style plank works if you want to dig that up. But it is great for teaching people to like actually create tension through their whole body. I honestly think it might be a better assessment of core stability than the plank is if you do it right. But that's a whole separate conversation. But like, make sure people are proficient in bringing their whole body off the ground. And then why the narrow position? Why the index finger inside the outer edge of the shoulder? Some people think that's annoying and dumb because their score went down because they were used to going super wide. I think it actually makes a ton of sense. So on push-ups and on bench press, you can shorten the range of motion by putting your hands really wide, and that will therefore make it easier. But that doesn't translate to real life very well. There are not a lot of situations where you're going to push on something with your hands really far apart. So it's like a figment of exercise that would make sense. If you picture somebody coming towards you and you needing to push them away, if you picture needing to like push a heavy piece of furniture or something, like every pushing situation you're ever going to get into, it's going to look a lot like that hand release push-up position where your hands are right in front of your chest or right in front of your shoulders. So I think training people in that like natural pattern that is going to most likely play out in real life makes a ton of sense to me.
Well, I think it brings up the point of like, and again, we've repeated this for every single one of these events, but from a longitudinal standpoint, organizing your training, you would do well to do things like close grip bench press. I would even say diamond push-ups where your hands are even closer together. Incline bench press would be another one. And even bench press, but again, being cognizant of where your hands are placed on the bar and what that's actually doing. But more broadly speaking, training muscle endurance, you are wanting to think about the kind of higher rep range stuff. So this is where, with the deadlift, we talked about 3 reps is where you would want to kind of hang out when you're training for it. For the push-up test, if I'm walking this back a couple of months and I have an athlete doing bench press or dumbbell press or whatever, they're probably hanging out in a higher rep range because, again, we want to promote the metabolic buildup. We want to promote the fatigue. We want to promote holding onto your technique as you start to, feel the burn effectively. That's where I would want to hang out for a couple of months before we get kind of closer to the test and we start to do much more of a high volume push-up type approach because, again, it's getting more quote unquote sport specific.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of like training tactics too, I would add, going back to the ACFT days, I'm not a huge fan of like tons and tons of upper body pushing and no upper body pulling.
Mm-hmm.
People will talk about injury risk with imbalances and stuff, but the research on that is a lot sketchier than they think. But just in terms of overall shoulder health and even everything up to like postural stuff, I would absolutely be doing, like, I don't think that people talk about like a 3-to-1 pull to push ratio and things like that. A lot of that stuff's made up, but I would, if you're doing a lot of upper body pushing training, also be doing upper body pulling training as well. We used to have an exercise on the ACFT that incentivized upper body pulling training.
Oh my God, what event was that?
Now we don't, it's gone, but you should still be doing those kind of movements in your training.
Well, like here's an easy cheat code. Just superset your pushing stuff with pulling stuff. Like, if you're
Oh,
doing
yeah.
like if you're doing 3 sets of 20 push-ups, like why not do 3 sets of 20 push-ups with ring rows, supersetted in between it or whatever. That is one thing. I mean, not to trigger you on the leg talk, but like the fact that there's not a pull-up on this test kind of triggers me a little bit because that is such a value. I mean, that's like a bread and butter test to fit, like pulling yourself up over whatever. I know that,
Yep.
Anyway. So I guess last thing on this for me, at least from a practical standpoint with the push-ups, with the deadlift, we talked about reps. With the power throw, we talked about, work rest ratios and that type of thing. For this event specifically, if you're competent at push-ups and you are strong enough to kind of see through the duration, I would think about programming some timed sets, not necessarily 2 minutes, but maybe 1 minute timed sets with 1 minute rest between each. Like that's where we start to bridge the gap from broad fitness, muscle endurance around the chest, the shoulders, whatever. We start to bridge the gap into the specific or the specificity of having a 2 minute timed event. So do a minute of max push-ups, rest a minute, do another minute. Maybe after a couple of weeks, you're doing a minute and a half, resting a minute. There's all different variables you can tweak to kind of get closer and closer to that unbroken 2 minutes. But the one that I would be looking at probably the most closely would be the rest. So if you're doing minute intervals of work, starting with a minute of rest, maybe next time it's 45 seconds of rest. Then, the next time it's 30 seconds of rest. And then it's 15 seconds of rest. The idea there is that you're giving the body less and less time to recover, which is becoming more and more specific to an unbroken set that is 2 minutes long. And that's kind of where I'll leave it from a practical standpoint, unless you have anything else.
No, I dig it. That was a good way to end it.
Awesome. So the next one, maybe this is probably the most recognizable of the ACFT events, is the sprint drag carry. So that for folks that are unfamiliar, that is 5 by 50 meter shuttles for time. There's a sprint, a drag, you're dragging a sled, a lateral shuffle, which is so fun to watch for the non-athletic folks out there, a kettlebell carry, and then another sprint. So we're 4 events in now on the Army's ACFT website. This is the first time that they haven't mentioned flexibility as a fitness component. So shout out to the Army. But we are looking here at muscle endurance, muscular strength. They use my favorite word, anaerobic power and anaerobic endurance. Effectively, this is what I would say is work capacity, your ability to tolerate suck, because it's not a super long event. I think 90 seconds is the max, right?
Yeah, in that neighborhood.
It's a lot. Like there's a lot that's happening here. It's a lot of movements that are weird. You're turning with a kettlebell, you're dragging a sled backwards, you're side shuffling. I mean, this is the one from my experience doing all of these events in sequence. Like this is the one that kind of sticks with you the longest after it's over.
I will offer a tiny nugget of history here as well. You'll notice the name of the event is the sprint drag carry, not the sprint drag lateral carry. The lateral was added fairly late in the game. It was not in the event when the ACFT was originally announced. And this does come back to the athleticism coordination kind of thing. Too many people finished the drag, turned, tried to sprint, and face planted super hard into the ground because their legs didn't work anymore. So the lateral was added primarily as a safety measure to have people stop eating it into the grass.
Wait, so they were sprinting down and back. They were grabbing the sled and backpedaling down and back, and then turning to sprint and face planting.
Yeah, because they had not like fully appreciated how smoked their quads were, and like tried to go real fast, and their legs didn't respond the way they expected them to, and had a real bad time.
I will tell, yeah, just on that, like, I don't know, having done this, like, you just feel stupid doing a lateral shuffle for time.
It's hard to look cool doing laterals. fast.
It's really, unless you're like an NFL running back, like it's hard to look cool doing fast laterals. You're right.
Yeah.
So training for this one, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. You could have a conversation around sprint training. You could have a conversation around sled drags. And I mean, lateral, we talked about, farmers carries. I think, I don't know, just off the cuff, I would say that, again, similar for me, at least, to the power throw, like this is one of those where it helps to maybe break the four or five pieces of this down, and then as you get closer, kind of put them back together. So what I mean by that is like become proficient at dragging a sled backwards. Figure out what angle makes the most sense. Figure out if pushing off of your toes versus your heels, what the weight feels like, doing it on grass versus concrete. I mean, like there's all different things you could play with. The sprint stuff as well. I mean, change of direction. Like sprinting and change of direction practice, that type of stuff is good to throw in like earlier in your sessions, even as like a warm up. We talked about some power training, like this is a good carryover for that. Lateral shuffle, again with the technique piece. The farmer's carry, it's not super heavy, it's 40 pounds, but for me the weird part was like, because you're running with it and then you're turning around. So like turning around with weight is kind of a funky thing if you've never done it before. So I would just encourage people to like put some of that into your training. Because there's ways, I mean, for me at least, there's ways where like, if you're running towards that count and you're going to turn left, you can kind of swing your outside kettlebell forward and your inside kettlebell backwards and sort of propel yourself around / also potentially tear your ACL. But like there's ways to get funky with it where it can actually make it a little bit quicker. I mean, maybe that's like a weird rabbit hole I just went down.
As long as we're knocking out like annoying test isms or whatever, because I don't think this is really like training so much. Like we're not developing the components of fitness, but remember that it is up to you to set up the sled and the kettlebells the way you want them for your turnarounds and stuff. So like having a plan for that and practicing it a little bit is smart. Just so you don't like show up and like not know where the handles are or whatever.
Yeah, for like the thing that sticks out to me with this event is less like how to train for it, because I think if you're training well, you'll be okay. It's more just appreciating what this event in particular is going to add to the remaining two events. Because like I said, this is the one that you'll probably feel the most. And then going from this into a plank, your quads are going to be smoked as you're sitting there in that plank. And then going from that into the run, and we'll get into this a little bit later when we talk about stacking some of these up in training, but like that's what stands out to me is just appreciating the fatigue that's going to come out of this and then building that into the events coming further on in the test.
So not to like skip over how to train for the event though, because we kind of talked about like how to optimize your technique or whatever. But
sure.
Something I point out to folks with the sprint drag carry is that know where people struggle in it and then determine the training they should be doing based on that, right? Because for probably the majority of people, this is going to be a work capacity type of thing, like a ability to like maintain a certain intensity for a certain duration. It's going to be kind of their lungs that are getting them a lot towards the end. Those people will benefit a lot from things like 400s and 800s and interval training and whatever. But there is a somewhat significant population, and it's mostly true for people where that 90-pound sled is a very significant percentage of their body weight. So smaller folks, you're going to see this more often, where like lower body muscular endurance bordering on strength is the real limiter for them. And these are the folks that are getting absolutely wrecked by the sled drag to the point that they're like not moving fast with it anymore. They're just like suffering through the sled drag and it's slowing them down dramatically. Those folks will benefit from lower body strength training, lower body muscular endurance kind of training, just doing some sled drags, doing some sled pushes, doing some lunges, things like that to develop the lower body strength so that it ends up becoming more of a work capacity for them once they've passed that hurdle of like the minimum requirement of strength.
No, that's a good point. And I've seen people where they're flying and then all of a sudden they're dragging that sled and things just grind to a halt because it is really heavy. So yeah, doing heavy sled drags, heavy sled pushes, just heavy lifting of weight in general is going to, the stronger you are, the faster that sled is going to move. I mean, I think just leaving it at that should probably answer most questions.
I'll throw in a tiny soldiering thing as well. I've done this with a lot of people it was part of the Master Fitness Trainer course as part of like an assessment you have to do while you're there, combat focus assessment. Soldiers should get exposed to heavier sleds than 90 pounds. They should know what it feels like to drag a person in their kit, whether that's like on a Skedco, whether it's carrying litters, whether it's just dragging the person across a field. Like being exposed to that and knowing how it feels and making sure you are strong enough to perform it at a baseline level is fundamental to soldiering. That's just reality. Every class that came through, there'd be a couple people who got their asses absolutely kicked by having to drag 150, 180, however many pounds sled. When it's real life and you have to drag a person and it's an emergency, you don't want that to be when you find out whether you can do it or not.
That's a good point. So, yeah, you mentioned work capacity. And I think, again, from a training standpoint with this one, I'm just like jotting some things down, like movements that I would focus on are like heavy lunges would help. I mean, because dragging a sled, sprinting, all of that it's unilateral. Gait is unilateral. So having single leg strength is going to be helpful. Step ups is another one. I mean, it's effectively the same thing as a lunge, just in a different kind of range of motion. And you can hold weight when you do those. Hill repeats and sprints. You talked about sprints. I mean, obviously there is a sprint in this, but sprinting up a hill will add sprinting up a hill is kind of the equivalent of adding weight to a sprint. Intervals, doing work capacity intervals. So 90 seconds on, 90 seconds off, 60 seconds on, 90 seconds. You can structure those however you like. But the idea there is that we're hanging out in that 60-second to 90-second to maybe even 2-minute range and doing a lot of things that are fatiguing, especially fatiguing in the lower body, and just exposing yourself to the fatigue, the metabolic buildup, similarly to what we talked about with the push-up. I think here at least is where you can have some fun. Once you decide on your interval structure and your time, you can have some fun with the movement selections. It doesn't always have to be sprinting, dragging, shuffling laterally, and carrying. I think you can get away with things like thrusters, talked about lunges, step ups, that kind of stuff. Like you can have some fun with it. You can even do like an assault bike repeat type thing. Like that'll simulate some of this more so than not doing anything at all.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate.
All right, moving on.
We good on sprint drag carry?
I think we're good on sprint drag carry. Moving on, plank. I appreciate the Army for abbreviating this PLK. No need. The PLK, the plank, assesses muscular endurance and balance. Again, no mention of flexibility here, which is good. For me, the first thing that stands out with this, do a plank for a long time. I think what's the max for like, it's like 3 minutes or something. Like it's a while.
I've got the chart over here. Let me check on 3 minutes and 40 seconds.
Yeah. So like do a plank for a long time and just see what starts to hurt. Maybe hurt's the wrong word. Like see what starts to burn. For some people, it might be your triceps. For some people, it might be your core. For some people, it might be your shoulders. It might be your hips for some people. That's going to be a good indication of your limiting factor. And I say that because that then drives the conversation around how to train for it. For example, if the triceps is where it starts to burn, I would address, higher rep push-ups, higher rep dumbbell press, like all the types of things you would normally do to build up strength and endurance in your triceps. If it's your core, same kind of deal. If it's your shoulders, same kind of deal. But for me, it's like doing a plank for that long, seldom is it actually your abs that are the issue, I think.
I would agree with that. It may vary for different people. I'll come back to the specifics of training for the plank necessarily, and I will admit something right now that runs a little bit contradictory to my fervent support for the leg tuck.
You've never actually done a leg tuck?
That is not what I'm admitting. Despite the fact that it's true that the plank was not studied as part of the baseline soldier physical readiness requirement study that generated the ACFT in general, there is, in fact, literature in tactical populations suggesting that the plank has some validity as an assessment that I could predict some tactically relevant performance and things like that. I don't love planks. I think there are better assessments of core stability, core strength, whatever. That said, though, it's not entirely without merit. There is some evidence in relevant populations that it can be a useful assessment. Going back to the how to train for it piece, though, you kind of can't get around the fact that you're going to have to do some planks to get better at planks. You'll hear lots of people talk about like heavy barbell lifts are enough to train your core, yada, yada, yada. You're probably going to need some like specific core training to do well here. And you also want probably some core training to do well at lots of other things, despite what people say about heavy squats and heavy deadlifts. But some like useful stuff, you're probably going to want to train core stability in other ways than just a traditional prone plank, introducing some like other versions, side planks, Copenhagen stuff, like different weird things that challenge your core. I'm a huge fan of Palloff presses from different positions, standing, kneeling, whatever, holding them for long periods, all sorts of fun stuff. If you don't know what a Palloff press is, I'll share some posts I've done on that before. One I've started liking a lot, and shout out to Will Ensinger for reminding me of it. I actually shout out to Mark Taysom. He's the first person to me do it. I just like kind of forgot about it over the years, and Chief Ensinger reminded me. But like putting a heavy band across a rack and then like planking on the band. So you're like in a plank position, but your hands aren't quite on the ground. They're supported by the band. So you're getting a lot of like instability and wobble stuff going on. I like it a lot. You can plank for like basically as long as you could without the band, but it'll like, you'll feel your shoulders kind of light up. It's also less boring than normal planking because you have something to like do. I've started sprinkling that into my training kind of regularly.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff you get into around core training. I mean, it's like such a buzzword these days. For me, like I've changed my stance on it a little bit over the years because you got to think like when most people do core training, they do like sit-ups and they think of core flexion, and the core really is designed for anti-movement. It's a bracing thing. Like it's designed to keep you stable. So sure, you could do sit-ups. It's not necessarily going to carry over to something like the plank. You could do, V-ups and twists and Russian or maybe Ukrainian twists, depending on where we're at. That's none of that is bad, but it's a couple deviations away from what we're really looking at here, which is an isometric. And an isometric is kind of the resistance of movement. And so for me, training for this, all the things that we've said thus far still hold true. I think the other thing that I would add is, like you mentioned, doing planks and just doing them for a period of time. And then similarly to what we talked about with the push-ups, adding time over time. So like if you're doing 30-second plank with 30-second rest, and then the next time it's 40 seconds, and then it's 50. And I mean, it should be pretty straightforward. Like we're spending more time in the plank position, working towards being able to do it for, in some cases, 3 minutes and 40 seconds. I think there's no real way to shortcut it. You can do all the other things to help it, but until you have spent enough time in a plank for an extended effort, you're not going to kind of cheat your way into being able to do a plank for 3 minutes and 40 seconds is just kind of my opinion of it.
Yeah. And I'll circle back to, you mentioned greasing the groove or the grease the groove method with the push-ups before. I think planks are another one where you could implement a grease the groove kind of thing. It doesn't require any equipment. You could just do a plank occasionally.
Have meetings in a plank. Make everyone in the meeting hold a plank for the duration of the meeting.
You could certainly do that.
Be a lot fewer meetings. Yeah, I think we touched on the practical stuff there. Anything else on the plank?
I think it's pretty straightforward.
I will just point out one more thing. The plank for the ACFT is done on your elbows, not your hands. So just keep that in mind as you're, figuring out what version of the plank you're going to inject into your training. So the last event that we have here is the 2-mile run 2 miles for time. So there's kind of two ways we can go with this. And I would think that we would want to keep this relatively broad because obviously a 2-mile run, you could go down the deepest of rabbit holes with just the idea around endurance training. There's a ton of stuff out there on how to train to be a better runner. We can point folks in the right direction. We've done some episodes on this in the past. The big one I would point people to, and the conversation I would think about when I'm talking about the 2-mile run, is zone 2 stuff. The run for the test is for time, you're running as fast as you can in 2 miles, but walking back from that for the weeks, the months, even the years leading into you being effective at this, the person who has more zone 2 aerobic volume under their belt is going to be better positioned to do well in this event, I would think.
So I'm going to zoom out, talk about something a little more foundational, and then come back to what you just said. Because you will hear people talk about like, well, I was able to like cut however many minutes off my 2 mile by just doing 400s and 800s and stuff. And there is some validity there too. But the most common thing I hear, and this is similar to the gripes I've heard about the standing power throw, but people will say, well, I've been to combat and I never ran 2 miles in combat, and nobody I know ever ran 2 miles in combat. And those things are true, right? But the 2 mile run it's not in the test because anybody thinks you're going to run 2 miles in combat. It's in the test because we know that aerobic capacity is important for combat and life, right? For everybody. But let's look at what things are out there to test aerobic capacity. There's lots of different protocols. One of the best like research validated field expedient tests of aerobic capacity is the Cooper test, which is a 12-minute run for maximum distance. As you start to think through the logistics of running that with large groups, that's going to become a pain really, really fast because you'd have to measure how far every individual went, count laps, whatever. That's a pain. So to simplify it, we set a distance that everybody has to run and you just time them. So what distance would you make people run where like even your pretty fast people are going to go for at least 12 minutes? It's 2 miles. It's a pretty good assessment of aerobic capacity. There are arguments to be made that like longer runs could actually be even more appropriate given the fact that soldiering has a lot of volume tolerance kind of stuff. You're going to be on your feet for long periods in combat scenarios. That makes a lot of sense. But that's all to say that it's a well-validated field expedient assessment of aerobic capacity, and aerobic capacity is important for combat. That's all. Getting back to the periodized training thing, actually this is more common among junior soldiers, and it's probably not a lot of people listening to this podcast, but don't start the 2 mile run into sprint. You're going to have a bad time.
You're going to have a bad time.
I've seen that plenty. But just like new soldiers don't necessarily know how to pace themselves a lot, especially if they don't have like a baseline amount of running experience. Like teaching people that is pretty important too. But coming back to training, you talked about the polarized thing, building a base with zone 2 kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, we've advocated for it on here before. I think you just have to do like enough conditioning stuff to do well. I don't think it has to be like a super specialized program. Polarized works great for a lot of people. There might be an argument that if you're not willing to like put in the consistency or the volume, you might not reap all the benefits of a polarized model. So you might choose something less optimal that might involve more interval kind of stuff. Who knows? I'm also a big advocate if you can. And I know like a lot of units, if you're doing like normal daily PT with a platoon or a company, you might not have access to a lot of equipment all the time. But I'm a huge advocate of getting some conditioning in off your feet, especially if you don't have a huge baseline amount of tolerance for high impact kind of stuff. I've been a stair climber fanatic a lot lately, just because there's people on the internet. I love doing like longer steady state sessions on assault bikes because for some reason people think you can like only use those for high intensity, like short sprint kind of stuff. I don't understand that at all. It's a totally valid piece of equipment for some longer pieces, and I like annoying people. So a huge fan of that. Yeah, like rowing doesn't carry over super well. And I don't think we're in this episode, we're going to get into alternate event training, but I will briefly mention now that rowing is an alternate cardio event. Just learn basic rowing technique, and that standard is disgustingly easy. But I see a ton of soldiers in gyms that clearly have no idea how to row. Like their upper body's already coming back towards recovery before their legs are fully extended. It's all over the place. It's nuts. We won't dive into training for rowing specifically because that's a whole separate conversation. But if you're going to do that event, know how to row.
I think the big red flag here for the 2 mile run is do not exclusively run as fast as you can for 2 miles as your main modality for training for the 2 mile run. I think the thing that stands out in my head as I think about this is, well, there's a couple of things, but training well for this, event specifically, we talked about, zone 2 and just aerobic base type stuff. That is a fitness attribute that will benefit every single other event in this test, and more importantly, benefit the entirety of the test as a whole, which we'll get into here in a second. Just moving from one event to the next, being able to recover, being able to have a full tank as you go from, the deadlift to the throw to the sprint check rate. Like having the more aerobically proficient athlete will be better positioned to do well. So it then kind of creates this nice little, two birds with one stone or whatever, where if you're structuring your aerobic training intelligently, think of it less as just training for this event and more broadly speaking, just training for the test as a whole, or you mentioned training for like just being a healthy person. So, practically speaking, it might be that one day of the week you're doing a long run that's longer than 2 miles and it's slower than 2 miles, but it's deliberate and it's intentional and it's designed to create physiological change. That would be kind of the zone 2 thing that we talk about all the time. Another day of the week, you might be doing really short intervals that are faster than your 2 mile pace, because we do want to train speed. We do want to train turnover. We do want to push things a little bit. So if your 2 mile pace is a 8-minute mile, maybe you're doing intervals at a 6-minute mile pace. And then the last day, if you're doing 3 days a week, as you get closer to the test, the last day for me, or the third day for me, would be the test specific pace. So you're running at your goal 2 mile pace, but you're doing it for less than 2 miles. So again, if that goal pace is 8 minutes, maybe you're doing mile repeats, maybe you're doing 1.5 mile repeats. My thought would be that by the time you get up to a mile or 1.5 mile repeats, you're probably good for the duration of the 2 miles. So, that's probably your box that you want to check to figure out if you're good to go for 2 miles. You mentioned not sprinting to start. I think knowing the pace that you want to run at is important here, and knowing what that pace feels like. And it's easy to figure out. I mean, like go to the scoring tables and figure out where you want to be and figure out what that pace looks like. And if you're super far away from that, then it's going to take you a little bit more time to work towards that. If you're there right now, cool. But figure out what that pace feels like, and then figure out the strategy that you're going to take for the 2 miles. So, first 400, it's going to feel like this. The second 400 is going to be here. And then kind of the middle 1600 is going to feel like this. And then the last 800, like go through that in your head and figure that out. Because if you're strategic about it, you can actually trim off quite a bit of time versus thinking the faster I go for longer, the better this test is going to be for me. So I'm trying to avoid going into the super deep rabbit hole of, the entirety of endurance training, but I think just doing it intelligently and taking the time, and ironically running slow enough for long enough, is going to pay dividends when it comes to the 2 mile run.
So I'll agree that we don't have time here to go down the rabbit hole of endurance training, and we've produced plenty of content on it before that we can refer people to. But I will underline something Drew said about like aerobic training carrying over to everything else. The quip you'll often hear is, no matter what component of fitness the exercise is for, the recovery from it is going to be aerobic. So your ability to recover between bouts, your ability to recover long-term, is largely determined by your aerobic capacity. And going further on that, I have heard people talk about like being 2 minutes or more slower on their 2 mile run because of the fatigue of the other events on the ACFT. I would suggest that indicates either a severe lack of work capacity or a severe lack of aerobic capacity. If you really think about it, the actual amount of volume of stuff you've done, like granted, the sprint dry carry is tiring. It'll take it out of you a little bit, but the actual volume of all the stuff you've done over the course of an ACFT prior to the 2 mile run is not actually very much stuff. And we only like the push-ups are not going to really get in the way of your run. Plank, maybe a little bit. Sprint dry carry is definitely going to affect it, but not so much that you should be losing 2 minutes on it unless you just aren't training at significant enough volumes. And why is that important? Because combat and even like physically demanding things in the field tend to be work capacity driven. How long can you sustain moderate effort for, and how quickly can you recover from sudden bouts so you can reproduce that effort again? So like volume tolerance and work capacity, absolutely crucial components of soldiering and well-rounded fitness in general. So the fact that you have to run 2 miles after some fatiguing stuff that happened before is going to simulate that in a pretty effective way, I think.
Agreed. Yeah, that covers the 2 mile run for me, I think. Unless you have anything else.
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
Hopefully some of this helped with strategies for training. I think the bottom line is that there is no perfect test, but this test is certainly an upgrade. And hopefully people training intelligently, whether they fall into the trap of just training for the test because that's all they're worried about, or whether they do kind of what we've been talking about here of not training for the test, just training those components of fitness and developing good general physical preparedness. I think this is definitely going to set you up for success, not just in performing well on the test, but being like a well-rounded, pretty fit human.
Yeah, and one last thing I'll add here, and interestingly, this is where I see people screw up the most on this test. So we talked about the deadlift, we talked about the power throw, the plank, the sprint track carry, the run. As you get closer to the test, and I would say by closer I mean, 2 to 3 months out. I'm gonna steal a term from the triathlon world here, which is called brick training. And a triathlon, for those that are unfamiliar, is a swim into a bike into a run. And if you train effectively for a triathlon, you will start to hear a term called brick training. And effectively what that is doing a bike, say you bike for 20 miles, get off the bike and then run for 2 miles or whatever. The term came around because if you do that, your legs literally will feel like bricks. But it's an important piece because if you only were ever to train swimming and then train biking and train running on their own, when you get to race day, it's a whole different beast jumping off a bike and going straight into a run. I say all that because with the ACFT, I see people training for these events. And then, like you mentioned with the run, being shocked when the time on test day is different than the time when they were training. The plank feels harder than it does when they were training. The push-ups feel more challenging than it did when I was just training. The reason for that is by the time you get to those events, you're dealing with not only the event itself, but the accumulation of the fatigue with all the other events. So as you get closer to your test, I would start to inject the ACFT equivalent of brick training into your training plan. So it might be that, let's say you have a 1.5 mile run plan for the day or a 3 mile run plan for the day. Maybe before you do that, you do kind of a lighter weight sprint drag carry and a shorter plank. I mean, the combinations are endless. You can get as creative as you want to with this, but the takeaway point here is that the ultimate sport specificity for me as it comes to the ACFT is starting to stack these events up so that you see what it feels like to go from a sprint track carry to a plank to a run, because I guarantee the run at the end of those two events is going to feel different than just going for a run by itself. So that's kind of the last piece that I would add. The other thing to consider before we sign off is nutrition. I don't think we necessarily need to go too deep into it, but just being aware of the fact that these tests do take a little bit of time. So there's something to be said about, having food, snacks, electrolytes, water available, because that's kind of an important piece. Training what that feels like becomes an important piece as well. So what I mean by that is doing a sprint drag carry on an empty stomach versus doing a sprint drag carry after you've pounded some electrolytes or whatever because you're prepping for the run 2 events later. Like it just changes things a little bit. So be cognizant of that. Again, we won't go down too many rabbit holes. It's more just to point that out. But I think for me, we've touched on every single event. We've touched on some training strategies. We mentioned at the beginning that we weren't really going to get too hung up on the X's and O's. I think that, there's future episodes where we'll probably talk about some of that type of stuff. I would point folks to the episodes we've already done, how to train for strength, how to train for endurance, a lot of the zone 2 stuff that we've done. The big point for me, and the last thing I'll say is, if you have an effective training plan that you're just continuously doing that has proper strength training fundamentals, proper power training fundamentals, proper endurance fundamentals, technique work that's, related to the ACFT, but, really can be doing whatever. by the time test day rolls around, you shouldn't really have to have changed all that much. It shouldn't be that stressful of a test because you're already doing the things that you should be doing. That's kind of, I think, the big point here is that you shouldn't train specifically for the test. It shouldn't be scary. It shouldn't come as a surprise. It should just be something that pops up and you're like, oh, hey, I have a test tomorrow. I'm going to crush it. I think if that's where you're at mentally, physically, psychosocially, whatever, you'll probably be in a good place. And that is the end of my monologue.
It's beautiful. I loved it. I mean, frankly, I don't have anything else to say. I'm hoping this helps answer some of the frequent questions I get on the Instagram page and just in general with soldiers. I think there's lots of confusion around how to train for the test because it's new and it's different. I think most of the people listening to this podcast are already generally inclined towards fitness and caring about this stuff. And a lot of this might not be news to them. I would hope that those people would take some of what we discussed here and deliver it to those soldiers who might not know better, might not know what to do. Have conversations with your leadership about how PT is designed. I help dispel some of the confusion and things like that. That does bring me to something I've discussed on the Instagram page recently, which is that one thing we're going to look to do is create kind of some template slides people can use for LPDs, for leader professional development kind of classes for teaching people. I harp on it a lot, but if you add up the number of hours units spend on physical training over the course of the year, it's a similar commitment of time to a CTC rotation, to like the whole month going to NTC or JRTC. And those exercises get a ton of planning and a ton of coordination and lots of thought goes into it from staff work. And I continue to see physical training for soldiers, despite how much time we spend on it and how foundational it is, not receive a commensurate level of thought and staff work and emphasis. People aren't taught about any of these things. So hopefully some of what we've done here and some of the products we're going to produce to support it help people have these conversations with soldiers in a way that sets them up for success.
Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsinmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.
Thank you.